Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 113. And today we will continue with the article Wholeness as the Body of Paradox. I got some inspiration yesterday. We had once more a quantum meeting with a group of quantum physicists. And I came to realize that for them, especially when we went into a very difficult area, for them the new space is already internalized. Whereas for us common people, we need to put an effort to get this new space working for ourselves. Otherwise, the Newtonian space will be in place, because that is the space we were born with. And although it can be dazzlingly and scary complicated in the beginning, the complexions of Newtonian space that we already have is still more complicated. So don't be afraid. Space belongs to us. The division that the Milesian philosophers of nature did indirectly, so to speak, dividing physos and the internal life, the ratio or the logos, can only be healed by taking in space and taking in physis into our daily life and not making a division between space and thinking, philosophizing. This is the goal of Stephen M Rosen. His marvelous book Typologies of the Flesh is written by a philosopher. It's written by someone who shouldn't be accustomed to those things. But he makes a very important point. This is our life world. This is our thinking world. The division that was made between space and our own life is in some regards an artificial one, or could even be illusionary, not correct. That was the danger that, so to speak, Heraclitus warned us about, but also used to stir us into a more proper direction, a direction of Panda enai, and that direction is helped by the wish or the want for pandarei. Go into the movement, into the process, and seeing space as alive and part of you. I will take that up in the next lecture, because I am in the idea now of taking the most complicated first, thereby using the morning hours for these complex things. In the wholeness as the body of paradox, we came to the southern school of China, and the technique here is to cease preoccupation with technique, to overcome both in word and in deed the idea of a circumscribed goal from which one is separated and must strive methodically to attain. Rather than rejecting outright the Northern School's emphasis on gradually polishing the mirror of consciousness, which is called jnana in Sanskrit, the advocates of the Southern School portray the meditative experience as a spontaneous and authentic when practiced in a form known as prajna. Prajna, P-R-A-J-N-A. And prajna can be said to be the sudden realization that paradoxes are the foundation of reality. or the sudden realization that a finite diversity and an infinite totality, while being as different as they can be, nevertheless are one and the same. This can be compared to the wave-particle duality without a doubt, not a problem there. We normally think there is a complete contradiction, as it is, but there's also complementarity at bay here. Complementarity that we still have not discovered. We need to know where we are standing now. And we don't know these things because we grew up Newtonian. So the break is there. We are bound to find it. A similar break is the idea that space do not belong to our thinking world. And that idea is a contradiction as well. My space, my body here, is in Newtonian ideas delineated by a line that says, here my last molecule in my skin ends and begins the surrounding space. This is not completely true. I am of space. What surrounds me also is me as well. So long as seeing into infinite totality, this is a quote from D.T. Suzuki, is something to see, it is not the real one, only when the seeing is no seeing. That is, when the seeing is not a specific act of seeing into a definitely circumscribed state of consciousness. Is it the seeing or into one's self-nature? Paradoxically stated, when seeing is no seeing, there is real seeing. This is the intuition of prajna paramita. And this I call X plus non-X. This is the paradox of reality. It's built into space itself. It is not something of some strange theoretical idea. This is as real as it gets. This is the this is the tangible world is made this way, made of contradictions. So we need to get used to the idea that space itself is contradictory. Without understand that, we are bound to be cramped. We are bound to be weakened. We are bound to be off balance. Balance can only be achieved in contradiction. Flexibility can only be achieved with tension. Those paradoxical situations is what prajna strives out to help. I was lucky enough when I read this to have missed it before. Therefore it struck me extra hard. Let me recap a little bit. The Northern school, quite just I would say, tries to sort of encompass the both sides of reality, the contradictory side or the positive side, and make that a chore, training and exercise. But the Southern school agrees, I would say, but also see a problem there. And the problem is that by striving to trying to get the contradictions together, you already have a stance that they are not together. And this is what prajna solves. And I think it's bloody genius. Sorry for my hard language. Let me continue with another quote by D.T. Suzuki. It is prajna which lays its hand on emptiness or suchness or self-nature. And this laying hands on is not what it seems, inasmuch as self-nature is beyond the realm of relativity. Its being grasped by prajna cannot mean a grasping in the ordinary sense. X plus non-X. The grasping must be non-grasping, a paradoxical statement which is inevitable. To use Buddhist terminology, this grasping is accomplished by non-discrimination, that is, by non-discriminating discrimination. Where have we heard this before? Where? Well, in the politics of friendship. Here Jacques Derrida comes to our aid, because he has the same paradoxical statements to say about the voice of the friend. By denominating the friend, saying is a particular friend, we take away the force of the voice, because then we exclude. If I say the voice of the friend is from Amanda or Jörgen, it cannot be by Bosse, Eva-Lena or Winston Churchill. That is an exclusion. It's a preemptive exclusion, and that blocks the force of the voice. It makes it weaker, less telling, less literally, less forceful, less semantically loaded. Something I saw for the first time when I studied phonetics. A person thus discriminating beforehand cannot hear. And I think that's quite extraordinary. This was in 1993. And at that period, burned out syndrome, for instance, was completely unknown. But today it's very common. Somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 25% of the population are suffering from not being able to hear what is said. They are very hard to understand the voice of someone. And it's this preemptive take on it that blocks understanding. It can also be explained in another manner. You see, there are different approaches here. The more approaches we have, the better it is. Well, I said that 1,000 times. A third variety is the neurological fact that 3 times as many neurons are going to the ear than coming in or going into the brain. 3 times more are going from the brain or the system, you might say, to the ear than the other way around. And that means our attitude, our Stimmung, our modus is incredibly important. It can actually block understanding completely off. And it's a gliding scale as well. This old idea, which I would say in itself is a modus or Stimmung, that every word has only one meaning. I would say that is the attitude of everyone who's burned out. For them, every word has just one meaning. And what they do in their sickened state is to ask. But those questions are completely subjective. They don't really help them in understanding. So there's a very interesting parallel here between what the southern and the northern school says in parallel to modern times here. And I would say that Stephen M Rosen is very much up to time. In a way, without knowing it, he sort of preemptively says what Ian McGilchrist has said, especially with his 2 latest books, The Master and His Emissary. Probably, this is my hunch, even more so in the Matter with Things, that came out last year. The critical step taken by the Southern School is to embrace the paradox. At every turn, one must resist the temptation to fall back on conventional mode of operation. In parenthesis, that which presupposes the division of subject and object, end of parenthesis. Quote from Suzuki, all the logical and psychological pedestals which have been given to one are now swept from underneath one's feet, and one has nowhere to stand. This means that the paradox is allowed to pervade. It is through paradox that one challenges predication from within. Predication from within means having a preemptive take on the voice of the friend, deciding it must be the voice of Michael. Let me give me a personal example. Sometimes I hear somebody calling out my name and I start listening. He's calling for my name. I think this is common. He's calling for my name. And the more I predicate, the less I hear what that person is actually saying. It blocks out the understanding, literally. If I misunderstand what somebody says, for instance, Kalle, if I get too hard into that misunderstanding, it's very hard to dissolve. I have a personal story here. It's so good, my hair stands up. It was a friend of mine, sadly deceased, very religious, called Bernard. He was from Germany and he tried his whole life to polish off his accent, his German accent. It was a cumbersome thing for him to have this accent. He didn't want to have it. He felt that it made him smaller somehow. And I could barely hear his accent. It was incredible, it was barely noticeable. And I remember one time we were talking and there was just one word in his sentence that I didn't understand. And instead of telling the whole sentence once more, he just said the one word. And I focused as well. And my misunderstanding of the word, together with his insistence of just using one singular word. And in that same word was a mispronunciation. Slight. It would not have mattered if I had the whole sentence. It would not have mattered if I did not already sharpen my ears to listen in. And he had to repeat it 4 times. He ended up completely red in the face. I treated him as he just came off the boat. I couldn't understand his Swedish. The word was so slightly mispronounced, it was incredible. I think it was grave and what we have, grave and acute accent. Something in a fluent conversation I can't really hear if you're not using it. I think Kalle is not using it. Can I hear it? No. Does it ever happen that I make a mistake of it? No. But it happened in this case because he isolated the word. I had no more evidence than the word, but also my own predication. And in the end I locked, I don't understand this word, which is also predication. And that blocks understanding. It's also similar to going to a test, a tenta early in the morning, as we call it in Swedish. And you're not completely convinced you have the information or the knowledge, and you get stressed, somebody in the locale is being nasty, and you start sharpening your senses too much. In the end, you could block yourself out. You don't reach your knowledge. This is an internal predication. You decide internally what you know, and all of a sudden, it doesn't become accessible. These 2 ground level examples are pointing to what Stephen M Rosen is trying to say. You see here, Predication can also be that you decide it's an X and not X. That's a sort of predication as well. So you just can take my two examples, sort of tweak them a bit, make them stronger, and then you can understand that not being something is also a sort of predication. It is a predication, even though we're not used to thinking about contradictions as predication. To a certain extent, they could be called predications. Compared to this once more, it is absolutely apt to say the subject is completely divided from the object. Obviously here, pure subject, but it goes into the object, and it also makes up the object, and vice versa. This is the paradox, and it doesn't break. I learned that this morning. I dropped it and I thought, oh no, this expensive thing as I got as a birthday present is going to break. It didn't. Thank God it's made of Pyrex. It's a very sturdy material. I can't smash it like this, but I can drop it. Thank God for that. That's also a paradox. It's a third good example. What was my predication? My predication was obviously, feed it, Kalle.
It's glass.
It's glass, and doesn't it feel fragile?
Indeed.
And if you dropped it, wouldn't you predicate the crashing of glass?
Indeed.
I did. I had to look at it several times, and I was amazed. It's still whole. And then I saw very faintly here, you really have to look sharp. Now I can't even see it. It says Pyrex, means very sturdy glass. How many times haven't I mispredicated? Many, many times. I see somebody downtown who's not a friend of mine. I mistake different colors because of wrong lighting. I'm a painter, it still happens to me. Wrong predication is very similar, but the problem doesn't lie in the wrongness of the predication. It lies in the Stimmung. To what amount do I predicate? If I tense myself too hard, therein lies the problem. Then there is no access. This is what Stephen M Rosen trying to say. I'm putting it into another language here, trying to help you. It is not as complicated as it says, but reading the text, hey, yeah, it's not easy to understand at all. It's a very tough text. It is through a paradox that one challenges predication from within. Rather than saying X is or X is not, one says X is not X. This is no mere affirmation or denial of a predicated content, but predication's denial of itself. In asserting that X is not X, the customary subject-predicate format is being used. X is the subject and the not X is the predicate. You see here, it's a bit like the lies paradox. All pretensions are liars, and I'm a pretension, and I say all pretensions are liar. And therefore it means that this is a lie and you end up in a very terrible paradox. Here we use it differently. Here we use the paradox as a pharmakon to get away from the possible trap of the Northern school, where by predicating that we are not in harmony, we are not pandainai, we will sort of predicate something that will hinder the understanding, hinder the wholeness. I think this makes it clearer also why Heraclitus is talking in such paradoxical and hidden terms. The paradoxical statements amounts to a declaration that the syntactical boundary condition that would delimit X cannot effectively do so. Simple predicative boundary assignments is thwarted, so that even though X implicitly is being posited as distinct from that which is external to it, at the same time it is inseparable from it. This predication, this statement is actually the same as this one. There's no difference. This is predication and object at the same time. You can also see that the subject is predicating the object. In some way, what the subject says about the object is the subject. But it's not all, it's a bit more. This is a paradox, and so is the phrase where you predicate something to show both the wholeness and the division at the same time. The statement X is not X boggles our minds, because the human mind is a discriminatory organ. It is that pre-reflectively chosen I, whose principal function is to reflect, to posit, draw boundaries, finitize, separate. Nevertheless, to appreciate fully the concept of prajna, two orders of paradox must be distinguished. Consider a commonly cited example of paradoxical statement. Everything I say is false. Oddly enough, the pretension. Evidently, this assertion is true if it's false, and false if it's true. Applying the general formula for paradox X equals not X to the particular case, the term X stands for the truthfulness of the assertion. It is both true and false. Looking into being and time, page 31. No, this is not being in time. Heidegger wrote 1962. We may call this order of paradox ontical. Its key characteristic is that its opposing terms, truth and falsity, are particular objects of thought. Goes into the mind as well. Entities already projected before the subjectivity of the thinker, while the well-known liar's paradox certainly subverts the boundary between these objects. It comes too late to directly affect what Heidegger would call the ontological boundary. The division pre-reflectively established between the objects and the existential subject. What is a subject? To one side, it is a sort of predication. I am a subject, I predicate things to my surroundings and my own thoughts. I say, those are thermoses, and maybe there is a thought that I am thinking that, and so forth. There is a problem here. This is what we usually call representationalism, and it's a bit like it takes away what it is to be a soul or spirit. I felt that from Descartes. he says his thoughts that comes from the outside is all that it is. That sort of weakens the soul, spirit. I think that could be a hint. What this is telling, it is one part of the subject is, yes, predication, but it's not all. It's a bit more. It is pandainai. It is the wholeness. One could think about this way, which is not accurate, I will still say it. Think of a circle and I divide it in two. Having just one side would be less, having both sides would be more. Even though the other side is contradictory. This is not an accurate metaphor, but it can do at this stage. It's a bit similar to the coin thing we mentioned yesterday. It has a trap, don't fall into that trap, but if you avoid it, it can be helpful. And I would say, this is the second thing I want to say. All the helping tools we have, the Möbius strip, this one, you can always fall in the trap. That's unavoidable. They are not 100% sure to give you into the right direction. Why is it so? Well, for the obvious reason, your predication, your Stimmung, your modus. If you predicate too hard on this in a certain way, if your attitude is not open, flexible, taking in the surroundings, which I will speak about later, that could in itself stop the understanding, because you're part of the understanding. It is not just about understanding this, it comes from you as well. Another paradox.
Yes, so and I understood that the Southern school writes x plus minus x. I understood that. That's clear. Prajna. Okay, so Southern. But how would the Northern school explain it? Like in these terms, would it be x plus x, or do I understand it correctly?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what I can do here.
You can keep the
Let's take it this way. It's a very good question. Thank you very much. Very, very good question. Of course, this explanation is not going to be 100% accurate, but I think it would be helpful. Northern school understands reality is a paradox, understands it consists of two separate parts, subject and object. And one could also say there is an understanding of the Kleinwortel. So they accept x plus not x, and they have a practice or a technique called dhyana, meditation. Dhyana has as its goal to get an understanding of this, to embody it and also have the thinking of it, to understand the outside as being consisting of contradictions, but also an understanding of yourself as contradictory. So far so good. But by setting up the goal of being wholeness, you imply indirectly, and this is the problem here, you want to reach this. The way of doing it is through jhana and practice. This predicates to reality that it is divided, that there is a lack. You're not whole as you are. The Southern school says, already here in the practice and the jhana, you need to infer the idea of not wanting and wanting at the same time. This is the difference. They, in the Southern school, has prajna instead. The understanding that you have it and you don't have it. This is what you can say. So the goal, so to speak, is the same, but there is a very smart thing in the Southern school, and that is that I want it and I don't want it. You put the paradox in the goal itself. Otherwise, according to the Southern school, it could be a problem. One can also say, my take on that, put that in parentheses, is that you can make the wish stronger by taking in the non-wanting of it. I don't want something. If I say, I will only stick to my intention, what I want, I make my want exactly as the voice, smaller, less. If I take in the whole thing, and I think that is pretty accurate. Doesn't matter what a human being does, even if it's the most delicious cake, there will still be some unwant baked in there. And if you take that away, for instance, a nice cake could make you too full and nauseous. But if you take in that, the deliciousness becomes stronger, because the wholeness is always more than the parts, even if they are contradictory.
So Northern school says that you're always lacking, you could say.
They wouldn't explain it like that, they wouldn't say it explicitly, but it's built in. If you want to reach something, that says you don't already have it. That is what the Southern school thinks. You need to be doing both at the same time, striving for the wholeness and not doing it. And also make an ontological claim to say that you have it and you don't have it. In this particular circumstance, this is extra important. Otherwise, you can skip it. But if I'm to be a lawyer for the Southern school for a second here, they might be reasoning this is extra important in this particular case, that you include paradox already in the want, in the practice.
No, you could say that in the Northern school, they're treating you as they were parents to a child. You have to become a great pianist, and that is your goal.
Wow.
While in the Southern school, you're already adult and you have the choice of decide for yourself.
Yeah, it's good. And there's also, if I want something too much, it can actually destroy the happiness of having it. If I want. It could lead to some sort of limitation of the happiness. I think that could be help as well, hopefully. I'll continue while here. The division pre-reflectively established by the object or objects and the existential subject. In this latter division that constitutes the essence of predication. Therefore, to confound predicative boundary drawing in the most essential way, paradox must be taken beyond the merely ontical level and expressed more primordially. It must be brought to bear on the bounding of subject and object that precedes any mere division among particular objects. Thus, in saying X is not X, one must mean I am, not I. I taken as ontological, not just as particular, objectified subject, a specifiable individual with a personal history and personal characteristics, a given ontical being, rather than being some object or reflection. The I in the formula for paradox must be the pre-reflectively established subject that reflects. How do I actually understand that? And it means that if you reflect on yourself, you sort of objectify yourself, according to this one. You put the subject here. And if you do that too much, you become a Daniel Dennett in the end. To exaggerate a bit, you become a machine. If you objectify yourself, you don't have this living thing to you. And I think that is also the point from Heraclitus. We talked yesterday about the dissolvement of the soul. When it goes into the water like a lump of salt, it slowly dissolves. And this is not the fire. This is not accepting the paradoxes that makes up a living I, a living soul, a spirit. We become more like robots or objects. Of course, the instant we install the pre-reflectively chosen I in the formula, it passes over into the domain of the reflected upon. Itself becoming but an object now cast before a newly established subject, not included in the formula. In thus formulating ontological paradox, the paradox becomes ontical. From this, it should be clear that the rule of predication will not be challenged by the mere formulation of paradox. To write and think, I am not I, in the usual manner of writing and thinking, is to continue to predicate. Northern School in parentheses. Not that reflective predication would simply be suspended in realizing ontological paradox. The I, or thinking subject, would indeed still be reflecting upon itself, and by virtue of the fact that it was reflecting, it would be making itself into an other, and not I, or an object. And yet it would be doing this without just abstracting itself, without turning itself into merely what is other, thus cutting itself off from its pre-reflective roots. In realizing ontological paradox, the I would continue in reflective posture, standing outside itself, but at the same time, it also would be standing within. This could be helpful. The philosopher Eugene Gendlin intimated the possibility of such a curious stance. In his essays, Words Can Say How They Work, from 1993, and he's expanding on Heidegger's notion of Befindlichkeit, or moody understanding. And that suggested that our words originate from a pre-linguistic source that continues to operate in the midst of our speaking, so that, at least in principle, we can both speak reflectively about this silent pre-reflective source and directly engage it. I propose that by thus bringing together language and silence, outside and inside, the reflective and the pre-reflective, we approach prajna, the paradoxical wholeness of the finite and the infinite. And I would say you can also rephrase that to say before the finite and the infinite there is something bigger, a bigger thing you can't speak about, but it's still there. It's pre-reflective, it's sort of silent. Another important point here, nevertheless, all habits are slow to die. It is the reflective mode of consciousness that has long been dominant. Therefore, although the abstract words written on this page may be rooted in a pre-linguistic source that continues to operate even as we read, it is the abstraction that prevails. We may reflect on our concrete pre-reflectivity and its paradoxical relation to the reflective, yet we find it difficult vividly to feel its living presence at work in our midst. Perhaps we are in a position similar to was attributed by Young to the student of alchemy, who has acquired some abstract knowledge of his paradoxical wholeness, but has not yet succeeding in making a reality of it. What would be entailed in such reality making? The motto of alchemy is dissolve and coagulate. By the former, one attains abstract understanding. With the latter, that understanding is crystallized, made palpable, concrete. I suggest that this is what we must do in the present context. But again, we cannot end the rule of predicative reflection simply by breaking contact with it. Very apt. Since any such breaking implies predication. Northern school. The aim is to raise the pre-reflective from obscurity in a manner in which is integrated with the reflective. Yet it seems that to do this we must abide with what has been dominant. Follow reflection's own trajectory. Go through it to reach its end. Accordingly, rather than attempting to jump the gap to the pre-reflective, to go directly from these abstract words of paradox to their concrete pre-linguistic source, let us proceed more circuitously, which means carefully. Let us begin our concretization while remaining in the still dominant mood. This is so good. We are about to see that indeed, without simply moving out of the reflective stance, we may start to clarify ontological paradox by expressing it more concretely, fleshing it out, embodying it. I suggest that such a concretization is necessary to pave the way for a smooth and full meshing of the abstract and the concrete. I propose that the abstract must be prepared for its integration with the concrete by first being concretized preliminary in its own terms. Let's put the break there, I think. So we continue with our pedagogy here, and I would like to make as many approaches as possible to this, I would say, incredible, difficult subject. This is very important also to point out. Heidegger never fully understood that. We mentioned that before. This is something that came later with paraconsistent logic, and some people say that Merleau-Ponty achieved it. I'm not certain about that, but anyways, we'll do practice exercise here. I'll ask Kalle here to cut out very carefully 2 equally broad strips. No hurry. make sure that they are equal in width. So I'll ask you now, without giving you instruction, to make a Möbius strip to the left with the first one.
Okay, to the left. So,
And I also suggest that you just do it without thinking.
okay.
Then you will learn better. You make it a habit, yeah. And you should have prepared a little bit tape. There you have a little bit tape to put them together.
Was it correctly? No.
It is half correct. Let's see here.
Let me see. This must go down.
No, it should go to the left. That's what you should say. Half turn to the left.
A half turn to the left.
A little bit more, a bit more.
Okay, and then. No, something.
So if you try to...
okay,
yeah,
you
yeah,
have to turn it around.
yeah. Very good. And now you put the two ends together, not like that, but like this, together. Not on top, but like this. Very important. That's much better. Now you got a Möbius strip turned to the left. You seal that with a bit of tape. The tape is done on the table.
Outside goes on the inside.
Very good, Kalle. Now you seal it with a piece of tape.
Yes. Let's do it.
No.
Tape. Here.
And now you do one. Yeah, very good. And now you do one. The same thing, and you twist it to the right. The opposing way.
Yeah.
You go to the right there.
Here.
No.
This.
No, yeah, you should always start with the same.
So
Yeah.
I start from the.
Yeah, you know. Yeah. There you go. Put them together. Du får inte vika den, vad heter det? Don't crease it.
Okay, okay, don't crease it. Okay. This.
To the right, yeah.
And then in some way it should go like this.
No, not. I will have to check it out. That doesn't look right. Before you went to the left, now you're going to the right. You're standing here, you take half to the left, to the right, and there you go. You can put a piece of tape. The tape in itself was mysterious. Did you notice? Wow. So now you can see that they are contradictory. Why? Why are they contradictory? Well, take the first one you made. You can actually put number 1 on that one. You have a pen there.
Yes.
Or L. You can put L.
Left.
Very good. And on the other one you put right. These two can never be confused. You can have a look at them and you can compare them. And if you look carefully, are they the same?
Okay, let's show that this. They start out as almost the same. But
Yeah.
then the right one. No, the right one goes to the right.
Yeah.
And the left one goes here to the left.
Very good.
This direction.
Very good. And the interesting thing here, this is the most interesting. These are fundamentals. You cannot get rid of this leftedness and rightedness. It is absolutely fundamental. Whereas in Newtonian classical physics, we think that there is a definite up according to the coordinates and all this. That's not definite because there's no middle point to the world. But these things, left and right, are fundamental on a quite different level. And this is what also means by up in prana. It's the true up. It's not the up you think you have now. No, it's not that up. This is the true up coming from your true system. And it's very, very different. And this is actually an excellent example of a left twist. This is a true twist. It doesn't need anything to compare it for us to understand it's a twist to the left. It's a twist to the left in itself. So we manage to make things that are fundamentally left and right. And by putting these two together, we will make a Klein bottle. Why is that? Well, we will have both the fundamental directions of left and right. Yeah, put them together. You will have the fundamental directions of left and right put together. And by doing so, we get the quality of space itself. You can give us a hand and you can play with them and tell what is upside and downside. You can start with the right one. You didn't try that one last time.
So this is the outside, and it goes on the inside here.
Yeah.
Inside. And then it goes on the outside.
So I'll try to do the same thing here. And here we have three-dimensional space. It goes inside here, and it goes up to the subject side, as I call it. But subject is much more fundamental than we normally mean by subject. This is eternal, permanent, made of space itself, not something predicated. Can you see that this subject is much, much stronger than the subject we get from analytical philosophy, and especially the subject we have in daily life? This is much stronger because it's made of earth itself, of space itself. It's a fundamental in a way that doesn't need any description. It's not a predicate. So this makes it clearer. The goal of the Southern School is to reach permanence. The goal is to have a true up. And oddly enough, that is also the way of prajna. When you understand what up is, you don't think about all the up, but the true up. The more you do that, the more prana you get. And it is a developing thing. You develop in this process. You get more and more prana the more you understand. It is not a zero or one relation. If you think you know what it is, then you don't know. But if you're starting to get curious from these rather weird constructions here, isn't it funny, Kalle, that these things actually were unknown before? This is, and the Klein bottle doesn't have more than 120 years, I think. It was made by Felix Klein. But have a look at the Klein bottle as well. I don't know if it helps to have like a string. You can use this string. I think that could be good. You can put the string inside it. Try not to lose it inside. It'd be hard to get out. So here one can clearly see a very odd thing. That the outside and the inside is absolutely connected. Isn't that weird? That defies everything. So we don't have a container, neither do we have a true outside. So if I take that one again, I'm going to make a small demonstration here. I start to walk here. Let's imagine I'm an ant. I walk here. I go round, I come here, and all of a sudden I am on the inside. This is, so to speak, a paradox in 2 dimensions. Inside and outside, or rather upside and downside. Here it's a bit more. Here is namely in 3 dimension. Here we are talking about interior and exterior. This is why we get this extra effect from having one left turn Möbius strip and we add the right turned Möbius strip. And oddly enough, we get this inside-outside effect. And we also get a directedness. That's the subject looking into the object.
Would it be possible to say this is a vase, if you keep it like this, like a decoration, and then it becomes a human body, like a throat?
Yeah.
In a way.
You can actually fill it with some liquid. You can fill it with wine, and you can have a banquet. So it will serve as, although it is only one surface, you can actually fill it with wine. And you can go ask people on the street, is it possible to fill something that doesn't have a volume with wine or water or coffee? People will say no. And you bring the Klein bottle to them and show, look at this.
So could you say this is an image, a good image of the human body that is at the throat, and could we say it takes back to the lungs? Or
yeah. Maybe the gastrointestinal tract that goes and becomes the outside.
And then it returns, but how does it return?
It returns here.
Yes.
So the outside comes in here and it goes out in the anus. And actually, this is a new invention. The prokaryote cell, the first cell, it didn't really have that division. It was just one thing. But once we started to develop a gastrointestinal tract, very good, Kalle, I didn't think about that. The gastrointestinal tract is the mouth, going down here. You can show on yourself because I don't show on the camera.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gastro, and it follows the throat a little bit.
Yeah. Into the stomach first, and then into the intestines and out in the anus. And that is a new thing. It did not exist in the first cell. The first cell was just one hole. What did we gain by that? We gained a direction. And once we had direction, we could have left and we can have right. But for a cell that is just one single round thing, it cannot be upside, it cannot be downside, it cannot be left, it cannot be right. So you see the advantage of having an up. Maybe this is helpful. You can compare that to a person who would say, well, a cell does have an up and it has a down. And that person would say that if you put it into a coordinate system, X, Y, Z, let's put it here. I know it gets a bit complicated here.
But the universe doesn't have a north.
No, that's I was trying to show here. I will don't preemptively come to the to the joke. The other listeners might not know this. So that person would say, I'm going to put this cell here in the coordinate system, and all of a sudden I'm coming from the outside tell this is up and this is down. But this is not a true origin, because it doesn't take a fundamental. This is not a fundamental origin, and therefore it's weaker. It's much weaker. It's actually so weak it's discarded in quantum mechanics. Whereas this one has a true
right. It doesn't need an origo. It doesn't need this made-up system. And this has a true left. And here, oddly enough, you get the first up, because there cannot be an up without an understanding of this. This is up and down, left and right, whereas this actually is nothing. It's, as I think Mr. Fawlty's wife, Sybil, said to Basil Fawlty, no, she said to the Irish carpenter, the one who was going to change the house, the hotel, said to him, I've seen more organized animals lying with their back and their legs in a puddle in the street. This is what we are in this system. We don't have an up, we don't have a down. And I would say that is the greatest problem with people today. Because if we don't sort of, a way of saying this, that we are internally organized with a true up and with a true down and a true left and a true right, we cannot organize ourselves. We cannot have a direction. And whereas in this case it's an either or, it is either it's up or it's down. So you have 1 or 0, true or not true. But in this case it's always gradual. The more you understand up, it's an, I would say it could take an infinity. It is not 0 or 1. It's a life progress. And this is, I think maybe prajna could be the very first good tool to come to that, to understand in beginning to trod the path. And both the schools, both the northern school and the southern school, call that Tao, a path, because there is not 1 and 0 in reality. You never have a full understanding of up, it's a development. And this can be clearly seen from space itself. Look, there is no, this is a non-localized area. It doesn't have this. A point is very hard to localize here. It's a development. So this sort of is a paradox, and what we in the beginning here with these first lectures we want to get rid of or investigate, to use a more flexible word, is the status of the idea that this one is situated in the three-dimensional XYZ. Mm-hmm. And that it will not happen directly. Mm-hmm. It hasn't happened for me either. Mm-hmm. It is a development. But it's very helpful to train that, maybe 5 minutes a day, to try to think about this one rather than what we already have. And I can tell you, whomever you are listening or seeing this, you already have this, because this is in our language. This is in every vein in your body, every cell in your body, because your language has this. This is well established. And this is the reason why Stephen M Rosen thinks this is so important. Philosopher, non-technological, goes into space. It is decisive, because if you have this one, you will come to different conclusions about reality. I would say this is my own take. This is Hans Johansson. I would say this leads to determinism. This leads to the obliteration of the soul. It leads that you make yourself into an object. Have you made yourself into an object? The next step will be turn yourself into Daniel Dennett, an object made of smaller things. And then you can be so detached from real space that you will start saying, I do not exist. So this pre-reflective, well established within everyone in the Western Hemisphere, deeply ingrained already in the pre-Socratic language of the Greeks in their ontic take. It's already established long before I was even born. And that was the sort of birthday costume I already had. Unthinkingly, but determining every thought that I have, everything that I did. So it is rather amazing. I know this is not only Stephen M Rosen, this is of course Heidegger. I didn't realize that from the beginning, thank God, because that became much more helpful. He was coming from another way, and I never made the problematic choice of saying this is the same as what Heidegger said, that and that. It became extra helpful. I'm not as meticulous as Kalle and other people. I don't go look here, which people should do. So I didn't know that there is so many references to Heidegger and also things taken from Heidegger. Okay, thank you very much. It was a very interesting and exciting lecture, and we made it a bit practical. There are more things we can do with our hands and a bit of paper and some glue, actually. You can use glue, and then you can make what is called a torus, the donut, and that is a different take, and it can also be very helpful. And in that case, in that particular case with the torus, we start with volume instead. This doesn't have volume, it's just two-dimensional. Well, it's just one-dimensional, oddly enough, but well, let's call it. Starts out as two-dimensional. Very interesting. Thank you, Kalle, for your help, and thank you for listening. And I'll say, have a very pleasant afternoon, and bye-bye for now.
Thank you.